for your generous introduction as well as for your support for the Cuba poll. It's been a labor of love for Hugh and I for many, many years. We started this in 1991 really out of curiosity. It was an epoch when things were really changing on the island, we thought, and in the world, where the Soviet Union was no longer the Soviet Union, something that snuck up on everybody, including the economists, even though they have a Nobel Prize for it, named after them. And we were really curious whether those changes would have an impact on the diaspora, especially here in Miami. So we started this, and here we are 20-some years later, still carrying on what has become a tradition. Before I get into the questions, and we're not going to cover everything that we asked about in the poll. It's a massive undertaking. It takes a lot of art and craft to get this done. But do pick up a copy of the report. The way that we're going to, I'm going to structure this presentation is that we're going to go through some slides. Each slide is formatted very similarly, so at first it'll look like there's a lot of information up there, but it's the same kind of information. So you can look at each slide and compare previous slides, and it'll become easier than it seems right now. I've abridged the questions on each slide. The full questions are in your report. They're in the back, how we ask the questions. And there you can also see the questions that we've asked for the first time in this poll. This is also a tradition. We end up asking questions to keep track of opinions as they change over time, but we also ask questions about what's happening now. And in the poll you have, at the back, you have the full draft of the questions that we report, and which ones are new and which ones are not. I'm going to kind of turn this way because I want to be able to look at you and look at what you're looking at. The poll is a creation of us. I mean, we take full responsibility. We do our best to ask questions because we want to know reality. We don't want to hide it. So we are very studious about the way we ask questions. We learn from other pollsters. We try to repeat what works and what doesn't work. And then we follow methodology that we stand by. We have 1,000 Cubans. It's the largest sample of Cuban-Americans of any poll. It's always been. We've had as many as 1,800 when we really had a lot of money to do a larger sample. So we have 1,000 Cuban-Americans born here and born there in the sample. The overall margin of error is 3.1. That means that any number that you look at up there, if we asked every Cuban in Miami-Dade County that question, we are 95% certain that they would answer 3 points less or 3 points more than what we have up here. That's what that 3% means. So we're pretty confident that what we're tapping into is some reality out there in the Cuban-American population. That population is changing, by the way. The engines that are driving a lot of the dynamics that you will see in this poll are demographic in many ways. Many of us came over in the 60s. A lot more of us came over much later than that. And the ones that they're making more of, the ones that came in the 60s, estamos in every sense of the word. Okay? They don't make any more of us. But they are making a lot more of the people that have come after 95 and are coming now. So there's a huge demographic engine behind opinions about standards of living. The Cuban enclave is changing at all levels, and this is just like one bit of how that change can be measured. This is just some samples of the types of demographic changes that we're seeing. You can see that right here, this decade of 2000 to 2009 is pretty crowded numbers there, but this is the decade of 2000 to 2009. It's, in terms of decades, 10-year periods, it's a decade of the most Cuban migration from the island. And that's significant for our poll. We have to know when we do sampling, we have to know where Cubans live, where they come from, and so it's significant in that sense. But we are moving into a period of recubanization of Miami in many ways. I know there are a lot of folks from Latin America, but we're increasing the number of Cubans that are coming, and that's probably going to increase. This is nationally, this is not just Miami. But here's the naturalization rates of Cubans. are also maintaining a steady upward incline. Now this is the Miami-Dade County picture of migrations from the island. You can see Mariel just sticking up here like some kind of obelisk. And then, but you can see also from 95 to the present a steady increase, thanks to the immigration agreement of 1995 that has pretty much institutionalized a constant flow of Cubans into South Florida. It's hard to get the estimate of all the Cubans that are settling here that are coming from the island, 60–70%. But this is our reality. This is what we are trying to measure. Now, that has an impact on Miami. These are the demographics of Miami based on the 2010 census. This has changed already, of course, but this is what I had handy. And here you see the Cubans, almost 900,000, and you see the number after 1994, and those are the ones that are increasing. We already have a third, 35% of Miami Cubans in Miami have come since 1995. So we have a population that is changing, and that it's dominantly being shaped by new arrivals. Now this is the format that you're going to be seeing through all the slides. I know it looks like a lot of information, but up here we'll have the question, and then over here on the right-hand side we'll have the total numbers for the population in general. This is the total for everybody. Then we break down the population into 3 categories. When they came from Cuba, age, and registered to vote or not. So all of them are going to have this kind of format. So as we go through, we'll go, I'll mention one or the other as for you something to look at. And all of these are in the report as well, so I'm not going to belabor it. I just want to kind of explain to you what we're doing here. All right, so here we have, we went into De La Riga on this one, and we just jumped right to the embargo question. That's not how we ask the questions in the poll. We don't come out of the chute and ask the embargo question. But this is what we're presenting to you, some items that you might consider, we think you might consider interesting. So overall, do you think the U.S. embargo worked very well or not? And of course, we are not surprised to find that 42% and a total of about, 71% think that the embargo has not worked well. Now, we don't know why they think that. You might think that Cuba, of course, is not really, there's no embargo, or no Fidel is still there, although, can't, and Raúl's. We don't know why they think that, but we do know that that it is a strong opinion, except by the youngest voters, that it has not worked at all. Registered voters, 50% think it has not worked at all. Now, the significance of that comes then when we ask, well, do you think we should continue the embargo? And do you oppose, look at the wording. Do you favor or oppose continuing U.S. embargo of Cuba? 52% oppose continuing the embargo. 3 percentage point margin of error. So we got a population that's 50-50, roughly. And the 50-50 here is reflected in registered voters. 50-50 there as well. So this is it's not a sea change, it's just a change. People are looking at the embargo as either a failed policy or something that, maybe that we could do better. Maybe we could do better. That's me talking, that's not them talking. And again, you see that the new arrivals are the most likely to oppose continuation of the embargo. 58% of the new arrivals right there. Again, the younger the population, the more likely you are to be more willing to engage in contact. I always say that across the board because it usually is the case. The younger, the more likely to encourage contact. So that's the embargo question. The embargo question over time looks like this. Started up in 1991, 87% was in favor of the embargo. continuing the embargo. Now we're down to here. This is the Obama effect in 2008. Everybody kind of went crazy there. And then they recouped. That's the Rubio effect up here. and then we're kind of settling down here. We're about 50-50 of the population supporting the embargo. But you can see the trend. It's a downhill slalom. It's not we're not climbing a mountain. We're going down this mountain. And those are numbers. Now, restricted, we have, Cuba is the only country where, in the world, of course, that we say to some citizens, yeah, you can go there, to other citizens, no, you can't go there. And we ask the questions about unrestricted travel. Should unrestricted travel by all Americans to Cuba be allowed or not? This is the same way we've asked the question since 1991. Again, yes. 69%, yes, unrestricted travel should be allowed by all Americans. No, not allowed, 31%. Again, registered voters also 58% think registered travel should be allowed. Of course, non-registered voters, that number balloons up to 82%. More recent arrivals, as we'll see in the last slide, the importance of registration to vote and becoming incorporated into the political system is the last slide that I'm going to be showing you. 80% of new arrivals agree that travel should be unrestricted between the United States and Cuba for everybody. So there's, and of course the young folks, and they just want to be going to Varadero. No, not the also. All right. Again, this question on the restricted travel we've been asking since 1991, the same way. So you can see it's kind of, you know, we're climbing the Pico Turquino, you know, but we're getting there. It's 69%, and again, we have that dip up there and then a dip down and back up, which is a lot of polling. You can see that, not only in our polling, you can see something changing in 2008 and then changing again after. So you can see again from 44% in 91 to 69% support for the unrestricted travel. And we might say, wow, 69%, that's a lot of people. But, you know, 44% was a chunk of undecided, that's a large majority, minority, even back then. So the population has never been as homogeneous as some folks had painted. Which surprised me, by the way, when I first got here and started doing this polling. I thought for sure everybody was going to answer hardline all the way across. I mean, I was very surprised to find there's diversity in the community. All right, diplomatic relations. This is another question we've asked over time. 68% favor establishing diplomatic relations with the island. Among new arrivals, again, 80%. Even registered voters. When I say even, because those tend to be the older arrivals as well, older generationally and older arrivals as well, but 55% of them support the reestablishment of diplomatic relations. People-to-people travel. The question was longer than that. It's in the report. Abridged is, do you favor or not people-to-people, the current people-to-people travel? Again, overwhelmingly strongly favored, or mostly favored. You have 60–70% of the population supporting the people-to-people contacts. Again, the younger folks are most on this wagon, and the new arrivals are the ones that are most likely to strongly favor. And the registered vote, you have 44% strongly favored and 16%, so you have over 50% supporting that as well. The Cuban Adjustment Act. Again, the question is somewhat longer, without becoming push polling. It kind of tells people that we've been doing this for a long time. Do you approve of this or not approve of this? And of course, there's this I was not surprised by, we have a strong support for the Cuban Adjustment Act, overwhelming, 81%, mostly favor and strongly favor along all cohorts. The early arrivals are the least likely to show strong support for the Cuban Adjustment Act, but it's still, across all cohorts, you have a significant number of people of the population supporting it, again, the young people. youngsters as well. The wet foot, dry foot policy, the adjustment to the Cuban Adjustment Act of 1994-1995, you agree or disagree? Again, across all cohorts of arrival, you have over 50%, 50 or above percent supporting agreeing with the wet foot, dry foot, and registered voters as well have given strong support. And the new arrivals are most likely to support it most strongly. This is one that, again, the question is longer than we have here. We asked them if they would like to keep Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism that the State Department has. We mentioned the countries that are on that list, and still a strong percentage, I say still because this is one of the ones that surprised me, right? 63% of the population wants to keep Cuba on that list. Again, across all, except for the youngest cohorts, which really wants to take it off the list, all the others have show over 50% support, including a 70% registered voter support for keeping Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list. The next series of questions were only asked, the last few slides here were only asked of registered voters. If you were registered to vote, we asked you how important is Cuba to your consideration of candidates. In political elections, how important is a candidate's position on Cuba in determining your vote, registered voters? Very important, 30-some%. Moderately important, 26%. So you have over 50% that say Cuba somewhere on the radar, either moderately or strongly. Again, here you see the older generation, 65 and older, Cuba has much more salience in their evaluation of candidate. And in the new arrivals, the post-Mariel arrivals in general are more likely to still consider Cuba a strong, along with the older folks, the older arrivals salient in their vote. Now that question becomes important because then we ask them, well, would you vote for a candidate that would support reestablishing diplomatic relations with Cuba? 28% of registered voters said it would be very likely to do so. 25%, we're getting over 50% there, already saying that they would be likely to do so. So there is a sense that if you combine that with the question of the embargo, that it hasn't worked, then if some brilliant mind comes up with a way of engaging Cuba some way, there's a constituency out there willing to listen. And it might not be evident in this slide, but it's evident in two other slides that I'm going to show you. When you ask specifically about replacing the embargo with increasing support for X, the first X is independent small business owners in Cuba. So you can figure out a way to work. We established the embargo. Most people think the embargo hasn't worked. Can we come up with a way to trade it for something that will mobilize civil society in Cuba? Oops. 33%, a third of the voters said they would. Another 25%, down to folks that consider Cuba to be very important. This is the new format for the next couple of slides. We've divided the columns into, pulled out the folks that think that Cuba is expressed opinion. Cuba is very important for them when they consider a candidate to vote for. 61% of those that consider Cuba to be very important would vote for a candidate who is willing to, who comes up with some brilliant idea to replace the embargo with then supporting for the independent small business owners in Cuba. Again, you can see it across age groups The next question is similar. We changed the X. How likely would you be to vote for a candidate who supports replacing the embargo with support for increasing pressure on the Cuban government over human rights? There we get over 80%, 81%, either very likely or somewhat likely. So you combine all of these and you see a population that is willing to try something new, but not let the Cuban government off the hook. Basically, you keep pressure on them. The embargo hasn't been all that in the bag of chips. Let's try something new. Again, among voters, 70%, this is like one of these no-brainer questions. 84% of the folks that consider to be Cuba to be very important for on their vote are willing to look at that kind of content. Now, this is a question that is, of course, very important. Why don't I have my citizenship question here? It's empty. Bad. Well, there should be a question there that shows you citizenship, and I don't know if we have it in the report. I'll pull it up because it's dramatic. When we ask folks if you're a citizen, only 31% of the new arrivals from 1995, 31% are citizens. That's important in this whole picture because those are the ones that have attitudes that are somewhat varying, and those are the ones we're making more of. That's the ones that we're producing out of an assembly line, right? So only 31% are citizens. Once they become citizens, however, they vote, they register, and they get engaged. But only 31% are citizens of this column right here. This column right here. That's the one I was going to highlight. So the bottom line here is that once Cubans get engaged in the process, they do vote. But a lot of these things that I've mentioned before on opinions are opinions. They're not reasons to change policy. They're people's opinions. This is a reason. These are the reasons that will make policy change. Who votes in which way. Now, party affiliation is something that we look at every year as well, back to 1991. And you see a decline in registered Republicans and a slight increase in both Democrats and independents. Now, we'll mention that if you go to our website, where we have all of the results, not just these, but all the questions that I'm not reporting to you, you will see this number here to be, in terms of party registration, these numbers will be slightly different. Because what we've done here is looked at we had all the previous years unweighted. Unweighted. So we did not want to create, mango con, crear un arroz con mango. I don't know, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but we wanted to maintain a steady measure. So we put an unweighted number here. It just shows a decline and increase. The numbers are different when you weight them. They're 46% here, 24 to 25% here. So there's a decline in registrations for the Republican Party and an increase in Democrats and independents mostly. But that's something that ultimately will shape not only our population here, but the policies that the population supports. Now, what's the bottom line here? Let me give you a couple of ideas, and again, we go in the poll, in the report, we go more deeply into these bottom lines, but let me just, to round off the presentation, bottom line is that a majority of Cubans who recently migrated to the United States would welcome changes to U.S.-Cuba policy. That's repeated in all the slides. There's the folks that most recently here don't have the history of those that came earlier, and therefore look at Cuba policy, U.S.-Cuba policy somewhat differently. 58% of the post-1995 cohort favor lifting the embargo, and this proportion is likely to grow as immigrants from the island continue immigration from the island continues at its current pace. Number two is that Cubans express a strong support for policies that increase contact between U.S. citizens and Cuban-Americans and Cubans on the island. There seems to be, and we see this from the qualitative end of our research, the comments people make that we are quoting, there seems to be a difference in some people's mind between the government of Cuba and the people of Cuba. The government, they're not willing, they want pressure exerted on the government, but they see part of that pressure coming from the people-to-people contact, with the increased contact among folks. So that's something that comes across in a variety of, like binary, comes across in a variety of questions. Cuban-Americans express strong support for the measures to increase commercial relations between U.S. business and Cubans in specific ventures. I didn't report that slide, but it's in your report. The idea of the limited contact that we have on commercial enterprises, between commercial enterprises now should be increased. That's on your report. I don't have the number in my head right now. Cuban-Americans express strong support for maintaining Cuba on the State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism. It is a list, it exerts pressure on the Cuban government. It is important, if nothing else, for its symbolism. Screws us up trying to do research out of Florida on Cuba, but that's what the people think. Current U.S. immigration policies directed at Cubans receive strong support from all cohorts, that is the Cuban-American Act and the wet-foot, dry-foot. And at the end here, you saw that Cuban-Americans are very likely to vote for candidates who recommend the lifting of the embargo in exchange for other policies that continue to exert pressure on the Cuban government. Even when we asked about the diplomatic relations, many people, it was strong, there was a lot of support for establishing diplomatic relations. But there would often be, and I look at these soft questions very quickly, these soft answers, the things that our interviewers write in very, very closely, and they say, well, you know, we have no pressure, we can't exert pressure if we don't talk to them. If we don't have diplomatic relations, we can't break them. You know, we can't have an interaction between states if we don't have diplomatic relations. So it's not a way of giving in to the government, as stated here, at least as we interpret it. Is a way to continue exerting the embargo, trading embargo, for other ways to exert pressure on the Cuban government. Well, se acabó lo que se da. I will now answer any questions that you might have, and just go on. One more slide. I forgot about this one. This is the first empirical, you know, when Obama got re-elected last time, we all had these, exit polls that were off the charts, giving, well, not off the charts. I was, you know, I'm a Democrat, all right, I'm a social scientist, I'm a Democrat. So we asked, this is the first empirical verification or empirical question asked about who you voted for, right? Now, the beauty about asking a question like this, or the beauty or the beast of asking a question like this years later, is that you get to vote again, right? You get to vote again. So either people are throwing Obama under the bus, or this is more in line with what at least one of our colleagues at the university, Eduardo Gamarra, the Ben-Dixon exit polls showed a very high, up to 49% of the Cuban-Americans going for Obama. Eduardo Gamarra did another poll and came closer to 35%. This is, of course, years later, but I'm just telling you that it's telling that even, I mean, they could have all gone on the Romney camp. I mean, they could have all said, hey, I'm a Republican. They could have done that. They could have done the other way. But this is the first empirical verification, or empirical testing of what the vote might have been. And so these are Cubans voting again, basically, on Obama and Romney. This is how it would break down. All right, thank you. That's it.
Can I turn this off? Guillermo? Can I? Yes. I'll shut it down. There you go. Thank you, Guillermo, for your very succinct summary of a very complicated result series. And of course, there are a lot of numbers. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. So let me just, before we start the question and answer period, lay out the rules. First of all, we'll try to group 2 or 3 questions from the audience to allow for more participation. And then, of course, I have to ask each and every one of you who wants to ask a question to please be brief and limit yourself to 1 question. There's a microphone in the middle, so I'm going to ask whoever wants to ask a question to line up before the microphone. Identify yourself, please, your institutional affiliation, and then, again, we'll try to group several questions so that we have enough time for Professor Gladwin and Grenier to respond. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. Laura Weitz-Munoz with the Associated Press. I have 2 questions for you that I'll read off. The first is if you can talk a little bit more about what you call the Marco Rubio effect and that bump in 2011, because I was surprised to see that, in fact, at 45% in 2008 wanted to continue the embargo. So I wonder if you could talk about that change. And then also, you'll probably see already, criticism of this poll from other interested groups based on the TRIPA group funding and backing of it as to whether it's support for more people-to-people involvement on the island, and there is a political agenda, and I just wanted you to address those concerns.
Thank you. We'll go to the second question.
Once Maya from the Miami Herald. It seems that, if we're reading the figures right, about 64%.
Well, I think you need to lower your mic.
Sorry, I'm short. Sorry. It seems that about 64% of the overall respondents said they were U.S. citizens, but 90% said they were registered voters. So if somebody could explain that, are we reading that right? Is that correct? And then the further sort of detail on the TRIPA situation is that the first time that a for-profit sort of lobbying agency, organization, enterprise has been sponsoring or financing the poll? Not a for-profit organization. Thanks.
We'll take a third question and then we'll address it.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Julio Ruiz. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I have 2 questions. Number 1, how do you pick the 1,000 candidates for the poll? Is it random? Is it based on education? Number 2, and last, is it is weird that you have most of these people supporting, even establishing a relation, with Cuba, traveling to Cuba, and yet, out of those 1,000, they want the majority to keep Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. So this is a very bizarre answer right there. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll let the 2 professors answer. You want to start?
Okay, the second one, people didn't quite get the gist of that one. Yeah.
The people-to-people question?
As far as I understood, basically the same question, similar to what Juan was asking, but whether because it's a for-profit that does, it was funded, as I understand.
Oh, yeah, I thought
you
answered the funding question.
That is